Hey everyone, I'm Pavel Sobega, CEO of Tooploox. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you are all having a wonderful day so far. I wanted to welcome you all to our third remote-friendly event, this time focused around VC funding in those uncertain times. At Tooploox, we help companies build and design their digital products across AI, web, and mobile. We have been working with startups and building relationships with VCs to support their portfolio companies for almost a decade now. And with what's happening around the world with coronavirus and the global economic situation, we've seen ourselves how companies and VCs are reacting to it since March, how peacetime CEOs become wartime CEOs overnight, how companies adjust their budgets to extend their runway or even handle layoffs, how they shift their focus from growth towards profitability, how they approach raising next round of funding in those challenging times, and how VCs support their portfolio companies and what has really changed in the way they approach investing since the beginning of the pandemic. There's a lot of risks and negative impact of the coronavirus on many businesses, but at the same time, there's lots of new opportunities, and there are always winners of downturns. And with that, we've got some amazing panelists today, and we will hear from both sides of the table, VCs and startups that recently raised funding, and I really hope you'll enjoy the discussion. I'd like to invite Kasia Kamińska, our head of growth at Tooploox and an amazing host, to our stage to tell you more about our speakers and get that panel started. Kasia, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Pavel, for such a lovely introduction. And I want to add to that it's a very interesting time today that we can look back to what has happened within the past 3-4 months and draw the first lessons from that, and how this situation impacts the world today and what the impact might be in the next 12, 24, 36 months. And I would like to discuss it today with our lovely panelists. And I would like to invite to the stage first Natsuki from DNX Ventures, where she's head of platform. So she supports portfolio companies with their challenges. Stephanie, director of platform from Le Hippo, where she has a similar role as supporting startups. And we didn't color coordinate, but well, great minds think alike or something like that. Then we have Nikhil, who comes from both worlds actually. So he's from Ambition VC, but he's also a startup founder. So would love to hear your thoughts of coming from both worlds. And we have Matt, the CEO of Origin, who raised money and closed around just when the pandemic was starting. Lovely to see you all. And welcome to the panel. I would like to start with this very simple question. Where are you at now? I mean, we had people panic in March, April, didn't know what was happening. We have had measures being imposed and then lifted. And I just want to understand where you're at now. I mean, where in the world you are and where with the company you are at. So everyone knows what's the status quo. Natsuki, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you for the Tooploox team for having me. I think to answer your question, I think acceptance phase is where I am now and where our company is now. So like first, I would say like 4 to 6 weeks, we were trying to find out like what the heck is going on. But right now, like we sort of thought that this is going to be a long haul and then now adjusted to a new normal. So what can we do in terms of like conserving cash and maintaining the existing employee at the portfolio companies, and how to build the investment strategy and so on. So like we kind of like learn the situation and now kind of implementing. So that's where I am.
Awesome. Nico?
Yeah, I think similarly. I think it's you definitely where I'm, and thanks again for hosting. I think the times have definitely shifted, and I think it's so weird seeing some companies do really well and then some companies not, and it's this weird kind of phase and dichotomy. But yeah, in California, San Jose, and trying to, I guess, make the best of kind of where we're at.
Want to jump in?
Hi, everyone. So I am based in New York, and we shut down around March 13th. So the city started to shut down and go into shelter in place, and therefore we moved to work from home. So I definitely say the last 2 weeks of March and the first half of April was definitely, I'd say, a bit of a scramble to make sure that our team was working efficiently, remotely, getting Zooms up and running, and then making sure, getting a pulse on all of our portfolio companies, to Nikhil's point, figuring out who was going to thrive during this time and who we really needed to focus on and provide help to. I'd say now we're kind of past survival mode and we're into thriving mode. So I think from an investing and kind of fund perspective, we are working really well from home. As many know, New York City went into phase 2, which means offices have opened, but we're remaining in a remote work environment. I think it's been going really well. We've been able to meet with founders. The whole team has been able to meet, I think, more efficiently because of Zoom. So I think it's definitely interesting as we think about what investing looks like in the future. We likely won't be back in the office until after Labor Day, but it kind of remains to be seen when we'll be back.
Awesome. And Matthew, last but not least. And you're muted.
Thanks so much for having me. So we're based in San Francisco. And I think that we're, I almost feel guilty in saying this, but we've had a pretty easy kind of transition at the company. We're at a place where a lot of our team was distributed when things started. So the move to a fully distributed team was not a huge shock to the system for us. And we're also at a stage in the company where we're doing a lot of product building. We had been in Q1 and into Q2 in this environment where everything came to a screeching halt, like it did for so many companies out there. And I think that that's really illustrative of what other folks were talking about, in that many companies, it's really bifurcated, right? Like many companies are going to experience like extreme shock to demand of their product, one way or another. I don't think there's a ton of companies that are kind of in the middle of the road where it didn't affect them. So for us, I'd say that the stage that we're in is, this is happening. It's going to continue to be a part of our lives for a long time. So how do we bring, the best product possible to our customers and really change our messaging in a way that really fits with the new reality and the new realities that people are kind of experiencing.
Yeah, and I in a way, I like the new reality that we can all meet here today, and that, we make time for that it's breakfast time in San Francisco, and it's, kind of lunchtime in New York, and it's dinner time here in Poland. And before everything that happened, maybe it would be difficult to organize it, and today it's just the new normal. And I like the new normal if we can meet and chat about those things. Here in Poland, it's, obviously there have been measures, but they have been lifted very recently. And it's definitely getting back to our lives in one way or another. And I would like to ask you, about those lessons learned from that time, and what was the most unexpected thing that happened during the pandemic to you professionally? What was something that it was like, wow, that's strange, or that's new? Nico, do you wanna go?
Sure. Unexpected. Well, like as two things. One, for me, it was, I think I wasn't like operating or investing in 2008, and so this is kind of my first black swan moment in this industry, and I think when people said like these times are the best times to build companies, I was like, I don't know, but when I was running ops at another startup before, I realized like, okay, if I'm stuck in my house, like this is potentially a great time to start a company, and like it's kind of roll of the dice with what happens, but I think that entrepreneurship kind of itch really started like pretty much right after. So that's why I left and helped start a company, and during this time. But I think that was definitely something that I wasn't expecting. I was like just normal at my job before, so that was something new. And then like we were saying, I think it's so crazy to me. I had some companies that were like kind of great, and then after they've completely blown up, and then vice versa. I had some companies like a few $100K in revenue a month and zero, like that, right? And so it's just been like that entrepreneurship itch, but then also like trying to figure out models and creative ways for these companies to expand and grow. And I've seen some people be very creative and it worked really, really well. And so, it's just when people say you got to roll with the punches, I think this is a true testament to how well you can do that.
Who wants to jump in and add something? Please do. Or if not, I just wanted to let
Kasia, I think everything was unexpected. Like nobody expected this crisis. So like in terms of like my day-to-day at DNX, so we were naturally distributed office like in Tokyo and Silicon Valley, and I'm based in Silicon Valley office, but we were used to having an investment committee over Zoom and having a meeting with the founder over Zoom. So I would say I had a like easy transition to current environment, but I think the portfolio side, everything was unexpected. So we had to sit down one-on-one with the portfolio company, and do we have enough cash runway and 18 months of cash runway at least, and trying to figure out line by line, what are the areas that we can cut the cost and what are the areas that we can improve. So I think it was all crazy situation.
And what's like in preparation, we were doing some internal research and compared the numbers for April and May when it comes to investment of 2019 and this year. And we saw that while the number of investments fell by more than 50%, the average value more than doubled. So there are less investments, but if there is one, there is more money on the table. And I'm wondering whether does this mean that VCs are focusing now on bigger rounds for companies they already know, that they see that they are benefiting in a way from this situation, or what's your take on that?
I'm happy to jump in here. I think that a lot of companies who were either in the middle of a fundraise or were thinking about fundraising maybe 6 months after March really pushed up their timeline and wanted to get more money in the door as soon as they could. I think that meant from both existing investors, but a trend we saw was actually opening up existing rounds for new investors to come in who might not have gotten into the, let's say it was their last Series A round. So I think that we found that that companies who weren't ready to officially fundraise, that next B, might have stuck to opening their Series A, bringing new investors in. So we saw those rounds kind of increase, and those were earmarked for maybe April 2020 or May 2020. But I think it was in businesses that either VCs had, wanted to invest in previously, or ones that investors wanted to double down and saw an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. From my own experience, from many of my friends who are CEOs or founders as well, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head. I think when this happened, the world kind of took a step back and said, okay, where is the bifurcation happening? What companies are in sectors that are going to take off? And now there's a smaller subset of those companies that are really taking off. And I think there's a lot more competition to get into those deals for the companies that are taking off. You're seeing really more in the growth stage. I think some big ones that really recently happened were like Notion, Figma. I'm forgetting the name of the design company down in Australia, but that was another big one. And these are companies and these are all companies that are really going to benefit from the work from home environment, and these are the ones that investors are going to roll the dice on. I think the tough part is if you're the other side of that is if you're at a growth stage company in a sector that's really been heavily impacted, like a company like Toast. Company's doing amazing, great product, they're taking off, but people aren't eating at restaurants or in the same way that they were, and that company's going to be really heavily impacted. Whereas if you're a seed stage company, I think you have the option to be a little bit more nimble because the valuation hasn't gotten to such an extent where you can't kind of rebuild and think about doing things a little bit differently. So I think the fundraising environment is now much more like fragmented and segmented, like than it ever was before. Like you're really kind of falling into a specific place in the archetype of what funding options are going to be available to you.
Yeah.
Adding to Stephanie and Matt's point, I'm sorry, Nico. So at DNX, we look at the data in a little bit different way. Instead of comparing between like 2019 and 2020, we look at the last crisis, 2008 to 2009. And when we look at the number, like not that everything is going to happen in a similar way, but when we look at the number, the valuation and also the number of the deals in 2008 crisis bottomed out a year after. So we're still in the early stage of this crisis. That's what we observed. And also the valuation wise, when we look at, instead of comparing a year before, when you look at like Feb, March, April, May of this year, we cannot really conclude that the April and May valuation is like a crazy high. So we are still observing that what's going to happen in a year, like a 12-month period. But we saw, like I was looking at our deal flow just before this call, but our deal flow decreased, and I can say that we are more cautious and disciplined in terms of like making investment, but we are still open to business, but we're still observing. That's where we are.
Yeah, on the, I guess, traditional fundraising side, I completely agree. And it's so funny because there's actually like all these funds that raised huge funds like during COVID. So now it's like, they have more money, but it has to be more fragmented and pinpointed. But even like on the retail side, so I was a part of a company, part of kind of an early employee, and ran investment for a company called Republic, which is kind of a crowdfunding private investment platform. And they're seeing huge spike in retail investors. So there's actually, weirdly, a lot of people investing, $100, $200 in startups on their platform. So it's, I think it's also a good time for those kind of platforms.
That's very interesting. Like you're sitting at home and you're not watching Netflix, but you're investing in companies, right? So it's a different. Yeah, that's a way of definitely of spending time. And as I can see on our Q&A panel here, there are some questions, and I think this is a really cool one about what we are discussing. did the terms of funding rounds change much because of the pandemic? So if there are any discounts or the valuations have gone down, have you seen that?
I think they've either gone way down, like to like huge discounts, or they've gone up. Like I don't think there's a lot of middle of the road here. Like really the question's like, how is your company going to operate in coronavirus? And I mean, you can just look at the performance of businesses. Like if the revenues dropped, Nikhil said he had a number of companies that were printing, a few million ARR, and then it goes to zero. Like, okay, like, you're going to have to go convince someone that, look, our old business model didn't work, but we have this new idea that we've tested and it is going to work, and we want to scale into it, and we need runway to do it. We've got a great team, and we've seen this new way the world is going to operate, and we can go be successful there. All right. So I think, the investor is going to say, cool, good team. They've executed before. They get this space. They've learned something unique. We're going to take a bet on it, but it's not going to be at this valuation that was done 6 months ago, where the original story was working, the revenue was ramping, the market was there. So that's going to be, a rough road for that company. Whereas if you just happen to be in one of these companies that's, there's just, I think, a ton of them that I've seen, anything obviously related to remote work or collaborative team building. I'm sure this company, Remo, is going to do well. This is a pretty cool tool. So those types of companies will have no trouble raising. So I think it comes back to that bifurcation thing. And if you were lucky enough to be on the right side of it, then I actually think you have a pretty easy time pulling in capital.
So I guess everyone is agreeing. And there is a question, another good question from the audience is, how should startups change their approach to funding in those crazy times? Could you, like, from your startup founder perspective, but also from the funder perspective, what is changing and how should people prepare for that?
So I think obviously because of this, a lot of startups are like, runway management kind of panic mode. And I had some companies that I invested in, and they're like, that I helped to come to me, and they're like, I need this much runway. And I'm like, don't come to someone with like, I need this much runway to survive, right? It's about trying to, even if there's a small way you can change the story or perspective, as like, how are you adapting to this time and using it as a position of strength, right? And kind of changing that, articulating that story. I think that is very important. And so if you can go to someone and say, okay, this stuff happened, but because of this, we adapted X, Y, Z, and we're starting to see some growth here and some good momentum here. And so, now we just need to raise some more financing to push us forward in this like solid position. I think it just flips, at least from a perspective of if you like really need the money. I think it flips the story a little bit, but yeah.
I totally agree. The story is the key. I think some companies who are on the wrong side of this whole crisis had to pivot the product itself, but the people even like on the good side, the story is to speak to customers' pain, which is like the recession, cost cut. So cost cut used to be like a soft sell. So we used to tell founders that bring the top line revenue. Don't talk about the cost cut. But if you can cut the cost for the clients, that's a huge sell right now. For example, one of the portfolio company called Diligent Robotics that are serving nurse assisting robots for the hospital right now. And then the safety and cutting the cost for like assisting the nurse so that nurse can focus on the more important tasks is a huge appeal to the hospital, because instead of hiring the nurses, which is already like a lacking in numbers, they can use the robot to sort of like replace for the miscellaneous tasks. So the cutting the cost became a sort of like a number one sell when you create the story right now. So if you have the story that you can speak to customers' pain and that those companies don't have hard time selling.
And I would add just one thing. I think you just have to be really, really honest with yourself, like with where the company is and just like what the reality is. I don't think anyone in the VC world is like, it's not charity, right? So I think like echoing both of these things, like as much as everyone wants to help out, there has to be an investable story. So I think it's much more about how are we going to take the lot that we've been given and build a business in this new world rather than, hey, we need money because we're going to go out of business and we need to figure it out. Like that's not going to get anyone excited. And so I think as with anything startup related, it's about risk reduction. And so showing that you can reduce risk while saying that you have this really great story, I think is probably, I think that those are just like table stakes. Like that's how you have to present the conversation. And hopefully like, someone gets excited about, what you're telling them.
How do you do it over Zoom or over Hangouts? Like how do you prepare for that? What is a must-have in this remote first fundraising?
I think the more you can demo and really show your product through, whether it is screen sharing, I think the more tangible you can make your product, the better. We're seeing more companies, more so than ever, send us physical products. If it's a CPG type company, we're seeing more companies get really interactive demos. And I think kind of fundraising decks need to change too. I think that there are like 3 questions that every founder needs to cover in their fundraising deck now. And it's like how have you capitalized on this moment? Like what does your go-to-market look like to capture customers in the current environment? But then also like how do you plan to either sustain your growth if it's an industry that is taking off during COVID, when people start going back to work and they're not at home as much, or how do you plan to accelerate your growth post-COVID if it's not a product that's necessarily going to thrive in this environment? So I think it's both how do you become really compelling over Zoom through showing your product or sending your product, but also how are you addressing questions that are top of mind for investors right now?
One other thing that I think is really important is making sure that the VC that you're talking to is actually writing checks right now. A number of folks in my network out here in the VC community are not writing checks. I think a lot of people are. Again, similar to startup performance, like VCs I think have taken a view internally, like, okay, we're either going to keep writing checks and business as usual, or we're going to say, hey, look, we know, kind of like Natsuki was saying, that the valuation trend is probably going to trend lower as companies have to come back to the trough with worse numbers and need to recap the company. And so a number of big funds are just saying, hey, we're going to sit tight. And I think that conceptually it makes sense, right? They're saying we're going to focus on the companies that are not experiencing the massive growth and are going to have to come back, that we think are good companies, but are going to have to raise under much worse terms than they previously did. And so I think from the entrepreneur's point of view, and the VCs on this call might disagree with me, but I think that VCs are always, their job is to meet with companies, right? And to kind of, have their finger on the pulse of what's happening. And unfortunately for the entrepreneur, that can just be a huge time suck. It can be emotional. They're like, oh, a VC wants to talk to me. Well, if they're not doing deals, that's not going to be a great call. And they're always going to say they're doing deals. Of course, if they say they're not doing deals, you're not going to get on the phone with them. So I think, the ways to get around that are just look at Crunchbase. If they're doing a deal a month or a deal every other week, and now, we haven't seen one since April, probably an indication that that's not going to be a great target for you. So something to be cognizant of as you think about raising money.
Adding to Matt's point, from the other side of the table, I think we are communicating with the founders up front that we might take a longer due diligence period than usual. So let's say it varies, but let's say it used to take 3 to 4 weeks to make a decision for our partnership. We might take 4 to 6 months. But as much as like we initiate that conversation up front so that we are on the same page, I think the founder side also want to start the conversation first instead of like going deep in the conversation, right? So I think it's setting the expectation first, like, are you writing a check and how the process is going to look like and how long it's going to take. I think it's important to have that conversation first.
You said that's like from the other side of the table, because that's exactly why we have VCs and founders here. So it's not like only one side of the table. And I wonder, for both of you, like, how do you distinguish, how can you check, like with this remote first, like on Zoom, whether the person you're talking to, whether it's a founder or VC, is a great one or an outstanding one? So whether you're screening the founder, and how do you find out? Or when you're screening the VC, you've checked on Crunchbase, they are writing checks, but how do you check whether there's a match online?
Yeah, and just one other point I wanted to add to this conversation around fundraising. I've done the process now, I don't know, 8 times, like a number of times, and I feel like I've learned a lot going through it because I've done it unsuccessfully a number of times. And I think that really what fundraising comes down to is just leverage. So you need to come into the situation, and the last thing you want to do is give a VC 6 months to evaluate your deal. And in today's world, if you're not coming in with leverage, like, that's what the reality is. So right now the leverage has completely switched if you are a company that is negatively impacted. And so I think that the mindset of the entrepreneur is, how can I create leverage in this environment? And it comes back to like all the things that we're talking about, right? Creating the story, showing the traction, and then getting as many high quality VCs around the table at the same time. Like, you don't want to like kind of drip your way into it because you can't create any momentum. And I think that is like truer than ever right now. And then if you are one of these companies that's taking off, again, like, I think that you'll be able to do that pretty naturally. It'll come together. And then in terms of evaluating VCs, I think the best way to do that is talking to other entrepreneurs who have worked with them. Like, that's really the only way. And so the best way to do that is, asking the VC is probably not the best way, because they're just going to hook you up with the companies that they have great relationship with. So I actually think the best way to do it is just to hit other entrepreneurs up on LinkedIn and say, hey, we're getting really close with this VC. Would love to get, your thoughts on them, particularly a company that hasn't done well or has struggled, because that's where you see the true colors. And look, if everyone's making money, then, everyone's pretty awesome to be around. But I think when shit hits the fan, like, that's really when you want to see, like, how did they, was it, hey, we want to help you now that stuff's going bad? Or it's like, hey, there's this other bright, shiny object that we want to, get involved with, and, let us know if things turn around. Otherwise, we're going to kind of step back. So I think that I guess a shorter way of saying that is try to talk to entrepreneurs in their portfolio who have direct experience with those folks.
Yeah, I think to Matt's point, I'll say in a simple way, I think whatever power dynamic kind of existed before have just been a little bit more amplified. So, like Matt was saying, if you're speaking to a VC, it's more important, because you won't get to get that that connection like directly face to face. So you got to do your own more diligence, talking to their portfolio companies, and vice versa. As an investor, you gotta you have to also kind of, so it's just like, it's a little bit more amplified in that sense, I think.
I think investors are doing the same thing on the other end. I think, especially for us, we invest at the seed stage, and so much of that is betting on the team and feeling their passion in the room for like kind of the problem that they're going to be tackling. And sometimes that is hard to sense over Zoom. So I do think the diligence process has become more in depth, and I think a lot of that is references with people that, if they were a founder before, people who were on their executive team or worked at the company, if they worked at a big company, people who were executives alongside of them or peers alongside of them. I definitely think the diligence process on both ends is going much deeper, because there is something to in-person meetings that I don't think can be replicated on Zoom. I think we can show products, we can see products, we can hear overviews, but kind of people always say when you're choosing your VC, it's like you're choosing a marriage. And I don't know many people who have gotten engaged just after one intro on Bumble. I think they usually meet in person. So there is something that's missing. And I do think that references and deeper diligence is helping to fill that gap.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. And when you mentioned that you're doing the background check and you're also like checking with your network from both sides. I'm wondering whether this remote first investing process, how is it going to influence the market? Will it be even more reliant on the network, or will it be more democratic because now approaching you might get easier in a way? I don't know. Like I'm just wondering how this can influence this. Natsuki, would you like?
Sure. I think I've seen. I hear more conversation around like a cold emailing, that reaching out to the people that you don't know, but good cold emailing. So from, I think, both sides, we VC reach out to the founders, like creating a list of attack list, and then like talk to the founders. So we do that often. And when we do that, we do the research, like research about the company, and then state why we are interested in, and then explaining about what our interests are, like investing in Series A or writing this amount of check. So I think do the research and then write a good cold email. I think that still is the deal, especially at this time of crisis. And yes, like as everyone's saying, like a reference check and like relying on network, it's something that's not new, that we have been doing that from the VC side, reference check, talking to the previous employer, and we always done that. But I think reaching out became more like easier, and then people are more receptive to the cold emails and then a virtual relationship. So I'm optimistic about that, the virtual connection.
Yeah. Like I think, like I mentioned, I think things got a little more amplified either way. So I know some VCs that only take, warm intros, and now they're even like more sheltered a little bit. And then I know some investors that like cold, and now they're just sitting at home on their laptop. So like there's like they're checking a lot more different angles, and then even companies like Republic, right? It's like the amount of dollars you can raise on there has shot up. So if you're looking to fundraise in traditional ways, I think that's actually gotten more democratized a little bit. But with VCs specifically, like I said, it depends on the investor. Like if they're more hidden, then they're maybe they got a little bit more hidden, or if they're much more out there willing to take meetings, they've created office hours, virtual office hours, and all these different things to engage people more. So.
I'm gonna take another question from the audience, and it's about the common attributes of companies that you're seeing that are blowing up right now. It can be from your portfolio companies or your friends or your own company. Like
in a good way or a bad way?
That was my question too.
I guess in a good way, but we can talk about both sides. It would be good to compare it actually, like what's working, what's not working.
Yeah, I can speak, I guess secondhand. My fiance has a company in the mental health space. They sell it as an employee benefit, to an employer, and then the employees get access to the mental health platform. And I would say they're blowing up in a good way. So I think it's just a thematic thing here that makes a lot of sense, right? People are more isolated. There's some pretty traumatic things going on, whether it's financial physical health or more like socially related, related to like race and injustice. So I think there's like this trifecta of stressful things going on right now. And so companies are trying to say, how can we support our people in this new paradigm? So that's kind of an example of like a people first approach. So their business is taking off. And I think that, I'm sure similar to many of the other answers, I think it's just like we're operating in a new world. And one of the attributes of that new world is that, people are focusing more on their mental health due to the kind of the stress associated with it. And so companies that can fill that void are going to do well. And I mean, there's just such a laundry list of companies that have right off the bat, like fit into that. So like, obviously all of the remote, collaboration tools have done really well. Employee benefits, I think in our space are doing quite well when they focus more on the human, but I think there's another like wave of this that's going to come. And like one pain point that I have particularly that I think is going to be big is fostering international teams in a much more productive way. So like, how do you handle like cross-border payments with, folks who are working overseas? Like that's kind of a pain in the ass. And so I think that as companies become more distributed and more remote, there's going to be a whole new set of businesses that are built to service that and to cater to that.
Yeah, I would say I've been lucky that I've invested in a lot of media, entertainment, content kind of companies. So, even I'm an early investor in a company called FabFitFun, which is a subscription box company. And they've grown significantly just because no one can shop anywhere, right? So, let me shop online and get it delivered, right? And then, content companies, SVOD platforms, streaming, content, like all those industries have definitely seen some growth. Gaming companies, and all those kind of spaces. So, I think those areas are doing well, and then obviously retail and stuff have blown up the wrong way. So
Yeah, one more industry I would add is the cybersecurity. So one of the areas that we invest in at DNX, it's cybersecurity, and we need another, like a different layer of security when the work is distributed and people are working from home. And our portfolio company in cybersecurity areas are doing really well, so blowing up in a good way. And they were able to raise another fund and then doing a fantastic job. And I think this trend will continue this way. And in general, I think like software business, SaaS, are resilient during the recession. So like they have a subscription and recurring revenue, and then a VC loves the recurring revenues for a reason. So I think they are on the winner side. But as I mentioned earlier, like even like hardware companies, they're in healthcare space, but like even a hardware company with the story to speak to the clients, they're doing real well.
Matt, you mentioned that it's becoming more common for teams to be distributed with Trump's new measures against the work visas and with many layoffs at some companies. My question is, do you think that finding the right talent will be easier now?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think that's one of the hardest things to build. I mean, talent is like the core, especially early stage companies, right? Like that, it's all about getting the best people possible on the team. I think that you've seen a shift over the last few years where folks are saying, the cost of talent is just out of whack in San Francisco and New York compared to the talent available globally. And so the companies I've been involved with have gone really headfirst into saying, we can go find really great people internationally. And I can talk quite a bit about like what works and what doesn't with that. But I think that there was this kind of like, I don't know, there's this like idea of like having this great big office in San Francisco and everyone being there and having really great culture around it. That, yeah, it sounds really awesome. And I think it is awesome. But in this environment where that no longer exists, like by definition, it's like you kind of look in the mirror and you're like, okay, well, if we're going to be remote, why would we not expand to, areas outside of just the Bay Area or just Manhattan or wherever you are, to get the best people on board at, reasonable prices. So I think that is going to happen in a big, big way. And it's also hopefully it serves to normalize wages in like the global technology community, where I think you'll see emerging markets be the beneficiary of this. I think you could see San Francisco like potentially come in a little bit. But I personally just can't see any reason why, if you're running a company and like this is now kind of the de facto way of running a business, like we're all distributed across the world and we could be in apartments right next to each other in San Francisco and have the same meeting. It doesn't matter where you are anymore. So yes, I definitely think that will happen.
100%. I think our portfolio company started like having a office or like a team in El Salvador, having a customer support there or engineering team there, or Argentina, and like a more distributed place. And I think people started realizing that, oh, it's possible. And I think that the trend started happening like earlier than that. Like some companies, like I think Eventbrite started with, I think, Latin America and then North America from the get-go. But the people are more skeptical that, oh, our company doesn't have that culture in core. But as they're forced to be distributed, and then they are more receptive to the idea. And then I completely agree with Matt. What's going to happen?
Yeah, you can actually see the rent. I was looking at rent in San Francisco, and it's gone down 10 to 15%, like after the prorated stuff and in some places. So you can see that people are actually starting to leave and say, okay, yeah, well, I'll have the same pay, go work out of, Utah or Colorado or somewhere where I can actually go outside and not run into someone immediately.
Rents in San Francisco, what do you see changing within, I don't know, 12 months because of the crisis? How do you see it in fact affecting the way people raise money, but also the way people run companies? Stephanie, would you like to start on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's being said. I think a lot of companies are looking at one of their most expensive line items, which is real estate, and saying, do we actually need this anymore? But I think what will be even more important is how they think about investing in the right tools to maintain culture, to maintain communications. One concern with all of this that I have is with entry-level talent. So I come from a campus recruiting background, and I think that there is so much value in your first 2 years out of college of being in an office and understanding how people work. So I really wonder how this new workforce is going to impact new professionals and what that means for tech companies who sometimes hire full classes of 30 to 40 new grads. So that's something that I think we're keeping an eye on. And I think systems and tools that can bridge that gap and make training better are really interesting. But I don't know. I know some companies who have already made the decision to ditch their offices and go completely remote. And I know a lot that are waiting for cities to be kind of back up and running and are thinking about what PPE you need in the office. So I think it'll really vary by company, but I'm definitely interested to see kind of how this all plays out.
Just to add on to that, I think that I really think that the big tech companies are going to dictate a lot of this. So I think that startups in many instances, particularly on these instances, are going to look to the Twitters, the Googles, the Facebooks, and see what they're doing, because they will set the standard for what is expected from candidates. So if they say, hey, we're working from remote, you can work from wherever you want to in perpetuity, that becomes a pretty attractive feature of hiring and culture. So I'm really interested to see kind of what decisions these folks make, and then how that trickles down to the rest of the startup community.
I know before the event I had a chat with a few folks here, and I know there are startup founders, and there's a question on top of Q&A, and I need to ask it to Nat and Stephanie. What are some of the things that must be true for you to invest in a startup?
I mean, I think emphasizes on team is more important than ever. I think we talked about the reference check, but I think because the market is uncertain and then we don't know what's going to happen in the future, we focus more on the team who can figure out and navigate themselves in our uncertainty. So actually at DNX, like we started kind of revisiting the question list for us to ask founders. So like how to kind of like ease out the personality type or like characteristic, because we are on Zoom and like can't have like an in-person experience. So focusing on the team and like their kind of like a grid that how they can navigate through the uncertainty is more important than ever.
I'd say that our main buckets haven't really changed in light of COVID. I think it's always been team, the industry, and why this person to build in this industry. So like what's the bridge between the first two? And kind of how you're thinking about your company, not as necessarily like a single product, but as taking over and really being like a category defining brand. So we're big investors in brand. So really making sure founders are not just, I always use the Casper reference. Casper didn't just want to be a mattress company. They wanted to be a global sleep company. And, they started with mattresses, and then it was table lamps, and then it was pillows, and then it was sheets, and they wanted to be the sleep destination. So I think we look for companies with like big ideas. And I think that's definitely held true, but I think to kind of the other points, it's definitely more about like, now we're drilling in more on team, like, are these people resilient? Can these people adapt quickly? Are they thinking about how to sustain growth or expedite growth when we come out of COVID? So I definitely say kind of the team, industry, and why this person are the main areas that we focus on.
And I know there are so many questions still on my list and on the Q&A, and I think Natsuki has his hard stop at in 2 minutes, and I would like to have one line from each of you. What do you hope for in this situation? What's your hope for 2020? Because it's been a difficult year, to say the least. Like, what's your hope?
I think so I'm a big boxing fan, and I think in those situations it's like there's times for you to be an aggressor and times for you to be defensive and think about survival. And so I think I think the step one is for everyone, if you're a founder or not, the hope is that you figure out a way to stand up and survive. But then also, once you get to a position where you're at a good base level and you're like, okay, we have runway, we have this, you start to think about your creative ways to, start kind of thriving and kicking off. So, I hope for as many businesses out there, fundraising and operating, they can find creative ways to just kind of get through this and push forward.
Thank you. Nat, you want to add something in 1 minute?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Matt.
I apologize.
No, go ahead.
I'll go quick. So I have a kind of a cheat. I have two. So my first one is that we get a vaccine. That's my biggest hope. And then after that, I think that my hope is that everyone can just take something positive away from the experience. And I really do think, in life generally, like it's all about being resilient and, hanging tough. So I think that if people can just learn, like, I am really adaptable. Like I was able to thrive in this difficult environment and take that forward with them and whatever they go on to do. Like, I think that would be, a really positive thing from the entire experience.
Yeah, I think like a hopeful thing. I think what I found from the crisis is that the kind of founder community, like how strong they are and how they are willing to help one another. So that's something that I found in our portfolio companies. Like normally when we don't have a crisis, everyone is in a different place. So they're different stage of the company and different industry, and they're tackling the different challenges. But now that the people are sort of looking at the similar thing, like every company is like talking about how to keep the engagement of the existing employees and how to raise money, and then people willing to help one another. So I'm really optimistic about like how to get through this, and then like we come out stronger.
Stephanie, you're muted.
Stephanie just mentioned that her mic is not working, so I don't think she will be able to jump.
Okay, so my hope is it will work next time. And I'll build on what you said, that I hope we'll be closer together, and that those kind of events and conversations will become the new normal, so that we connect and we exchange experiences. I think this is very valuable. And I love hosting those sessions. And I would like to thank you for being here with me today. For everyone who can stay, you're welcome for the networking session. And if you wanted to all the founders that are in the audience, if you wanted to discuss your idea with us and have like a tech check and like a discussion how you want to build your product, we do run office hours as well. So please ping us about that. Matthew, Nat, Stephanie, Nikhil. So thank you so much for being here and for all your insights. And I love the way we dressed up, and I love the conversation. So thanks a lot, and hope to see you soon.